Welcome and good morning. I don't want to have too flowery an introduction. I was so hoping I could work that in somehow. Welcome to you who are in the sanctuary and to those of you who are streaming us from the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Grand Traverse. I'm Mary Ann Rivers, a member of the Sunday Services Committee, and if you've always wanted to have my position, please approach me because Sunday Service is always looking for new members, new ideas. We'd love to have you. Thank you all so much for joining us on this special Sunday, which we call Flower Ceremony Sunday. Back in the 1930s, a minister in Czechoslovakia named Norbert Čapek needed a non-traditional way of expressing communion for his congregation. Being a nature lover, he thought about flowers, the beauty of flowers, and he was looking for a way to pull his congregation into a feeling of community and caring for each other and sharing with each other. I'm going to tell you the full story later on in the reading, but for the moment, hold on to your flowers. If you forgot to bring one, please help yourself to some of these beautiful blossoms that Lauren Kyneth brought, and when we ask you to, you can come and bring them up to the vases that we have for you. But now, for the moment, we are going to listen to the prelude, which is going to be presented by our own two magical musicians. One of my favorite posies, Renee Russell, and Alex the Bow Jennison. And they will be playing a number called Dazzling Bouquet.
Gladiolas, come all you purple lilacs shining bright. Come let us all bloom together in one garden, a carnival of fragrance and delight. 'Cause mine is the church where everybody's welcome, and I know it's true 'cause I got through the door. We are a dazzling bouquet with every kind of flower.
Whoever you are and wherever you are on life's journey, you are welcome here with us this morning. I am the Reverend Alex Jensen. I use the pronouns he and him, and I welcome you to this service of bouquet and bloom, this communion of heart and soul, where we celebrate the flower communion together. You'll hear much more about the flower communion later in our service, as Marianne got to a little bit in our intro, as well as all of its rich history and roots, no pun intended, in our tradition. But one thing that you should know is that you are welcome here just as you are this morning. You are beloved, you are a blessing, and there is no part of yourself or who you are that you cannot bring to our congregation's bouquet. This Pride Month, we affirm as well our love and inclusion of transgender, queer, bisexual, lesbian, and gay folks who, among us, no matter whom you love or how you identify, there is a place at the table and a place in our vases here for you. And as we join together for this sacred service and ceremony, hear these words from Michael de Vernon Boblet. Blessed be the flower that triumphs at last over the snows, over the centuries, over the heavy feet of cattle and of soldiers, treading down the fragile places of the earth. Blessed be the flower that triumphs at last over the tangled branches, over the withered stem, over the tearing thorns of roses and barbed wire. Blessed be the flower that triumphs at last even over the hand that gathers it, cuts it off from life, from roots, from the memory and taste of iron and tears in the soil. Blessed be the flower that triumphs at last over the closed rooms that are not its home, over efforts to domesticate its wild truth, over the vain words of priests and poets. Blessed be the flower that triumphs at last over us, over pasts and futures, over words and silences, over deaths and lives, placing them all in their proper place, restoring to all things their joyful smallness. Blessed be the flower that triumphs at last. And come, let us worship together this morning. As we enter into this time together, we also acknowledge the land on which we live and gather, the land known to the Anishinaabe people as Kichiwi-Kwedong, the place of the Big Bay. We recognize those indigenous peoples who've lived on these lands for generations before centuries of both violence and colonization, those who are the Ojibwe and Odawa in our region. We raise the birch bark basket, holding the 4 sacred medicines of sweetgrass, cedar, sage, and tobacco, not to comfort ourselves or make ourselves feel better about this history, but instead to remind us to hold and make space for the Anishinaabe as we work to reconcile the harms of colonization. And as Unitarian Universalists, it is also our practice to light the flaming chalice, a symbol of the light and dignity within every human being. We join in this chalice lighting with so many other communities and congregations. Those of you online, we also encourage you to kindle a flame or a chalice at home with us this morning. And I will read our lighting words as Mary Ann lights our chalice. For the gift of this day and for our community of spiritual nurture and compassion, we give thanks. We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. May our many sparks meet and merge in communion of heart and soul. We also sound our singing bowl as well in this time that we've set apart from our busy and full lives. As I ring it, I invite you to follow its sound as it dissipates into the silence and see if you can hear and notice the moment to which you can no longer hear it. So in our service, we now join in gathering our flowers into these vases that we have up here, up front. These flowers are a symbol of each person that forms a part of this wider congregational community. And each of us, like these flowers, is unique and different. As we gather these flowers, think about your own uniqueness, your unique gifts, and what makes you, you. And in a moment, I will invite you to come forward into groups, Marianne as well, on each side, to come and place your flowers up on the vases. A reminder that if you forgot a flower, like myself even this morning, we have some extra flowers available here as well for you to use for our flower ceremony. And so we're going to have kind of somewhat of a clear path that we've kind of devised here. We will call you up row by row in different groups, starting with those in the back first. If you're on this side of the room, you'll come this way up and place your flower up in the vase, and then ideally wrap around into the center aisle to then return to your seat. Those of you on this other side, when Marianne cues you, will also, those in the back first, rise first, come around toward the side here and also return back through the center. We're not very practiced at this, but I have faith in us that we can make it. Just think communion, all right? All right, well, so in this time, we will now kind of gather our flowers, and we will join together as we do this sacred tradition.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. My name is Betsy Hammerberg, and I'm the Director of Religious Education here at UUCGT. And I'm going to share a story with you today called The Boy Who Grew Flowers. And I initially picked this book because it was about flowers, and today is the flower ceremony. But I ended up just falling in love with this book because of the way that kindness is shown and the way that differences are celebrated. Because today, what we are celebrating is how we are all different and beautiful in our own way, and we are all welcome here. And we celebrate the things that make us different, and we celebrate the kindness that brings us all together. So this is called The Boy Who Grew Flowers. Rink Bowagon was a boy from the deep country. He lived out past where the blacktop road became a dirt road, and the dirt road petered out into a little footpath. The path wound through the ancient trees of a wild forest, hopped Black Bear Creek, headed all the way up Lonesome Mountain, made a right-hand turn, and ran smack into the Bowagon's door. That's pretty far away. The Bowagons were the only folks who lived on Lonesome Mountain. The townspeople argued as to whether it was because they were such strange folk that they lived there, or whether it was because they lived there that they were such strange folk. However, everyone agreed that the Bowagon clan was a hotbed of strange and exotic talents. Rink's Uncle Dud liked to tame rattlesnakes, and his brothers and cousins were all shapeshifters. That means they can change the shape of their body. But Rink himself had the most special talent of all. During the full moon, he sprouted flowers all over his body. It was a beautiful sight, and they were the prettiest, sweetest smelling, and longest lasting blossoms you ever saw. Some folks might stay home sick in bed if they happened to sprout, but not Rink. Every morning following a full moon, his mama would gently clip the flowers from her boy, and off he would go to school. Now, Rink liked school. At least, he liked the thinking and reading part. But he was shy and quiet and different from the other children, so the teacher gave him a seat at the back of the room and did not bother with him. As for the children, they had all heard rumors about Rink's strange relatives, so they stayed at a safe distance from him. One day, Angelina Quiz came along, a girl whose family was in the ballroom dancing business and had just moved from Tuscaloosa. She had an easy manner, a luminous smile, and her right leg was shorter than her left by an inch. She always wore a flower behind her right ear. Rink liked her straight away. So did everyone else. Angelina was always surrounded by friends. Rink observed her from a distance. She is forthright and honest, yet always kind, he thought. He also admired the flowers she wore behind her ear, a different one every day, and all of them as lovely as she. As for Angelina Quiz, she soon wondered about this quiet boy who sat alone at the back of the class. So she asked the other children about him. "His Uncle Dud has a pet rattlesnake called Fat Lucy, and she sleeps on the end of the bed," hissed Fuster Shrimp. "And his mother uses a bowling bag for a purse," giggled Shirley Ann Smeeth. "And his granny was raised by wolves," snickered Gertrude Prugg. Angelina did not laugh. "Why won't anyone talk to him?" she asked. The others fell silent. The question rattled in their minds. One afternoon, the teacher announced that the school dance would be held that Saturday night at the church hall. Several of her classmates asked Angelina to go, but she smiled bravely and shook her head. "I wouldn't be much of a dancing partner," she laughed. Rink was struck by the wistful note he heard in her voice. "She comes from a dancing family," he thought. I bet she loves music. I bet she'd really love to go to that dance. The minute the teacher's back was turned, Rink slipped out the door. No one noticed except Angelina, who glanced back at his empty chair every now and then. She marveled at how his absence could take the shine off such a pretty sunny day. When Rink reached his home high on Lonesome Mountain, he went straight to his Uncle Dud's room. He rummaged under the bed until he came up with several feet of Fat Lucy's shucked off skin. You know how snakes shed their skin? Yeah, several feet of it. Next, he dug through his mama's bowling bag until he found a needle and a spool of silk thread. Then, in the tumble-down shed off the kitchen, he turned up an old leather mule saddle. What is he doing? I don't know. Rink sat down and cleared his mind. He thought intently about Angelina's feet. He pictured their shape and size and the inch of space between her right foot and the floor. Then he cut and stitched and glued. He worked right through from Thursday afternoon until Saturday morning. When Rink was done, there on the table stood the loveliest pair of snakeskin slippers that have ever been seen this side of Black Bear Creek. And they say slippers, but they mean shoes, like dancing shoes. The sole of the right slipper was 1 inch thicker than the left, so that Angelina could stand true and straight and tall. Rink imagined her dancing. He thought that thought so long, and the feeling deep inside him was so pleasant that even though the full moon had not yet risen, he sprouted a bunch of wild pink roses from the top of his head. That afternoon, Rink followed the footpath down through the forest, across Black Bear Creek, along the dirt road, onto the blacktop road, and up the hill. Halfway up the hill, he opened a small gate and walked up the little path that led right to Angelina's front porch. Angelina was helping her mama sew up a fancy new tango dress. The whole house was quiet, and every little snip of the scissors made a sad little tweak in her heart. She thought about Rink and how she had missed him at school all day Friday. When Angelina heard a knock at the door, her heart flipped. There stood Rink with a bunch of wild pink roses in his left hand and a pair of snakeskin slippers in his right. "These are for you," he said as he offered the slippers to her. "If you wear these, you'll dance just fine." Angelina wriggled her bare toes into the slippers then and there. For the first time in her life, she felt herself stand up straight. She took one step, then another, and then she did a little practice dance step. Angelina looked at Rink with delight. "Will you be my dancing partner?" she asked. "I don't know how to do that kind of dancing," said Rink shyly. "I'll teach you," cried Angelina. "I've watched my family so many times, I know all of the steps by heart." She took his hand and they danced together down the path. After the dance, Rink walked Angelina home. They stopped on the way and sat under an old buttonball tree. Angelina told Rink about her family, and he told her about his. Then, with a pounding heart, he revealed to her the fact that he sprouted flowers all over himself during the full moon. Angelina smiled with delight. Then she bent down and showed Rink where the flowers she wore grew right out from behind her ear. From that day on, Angelina Quiz and Rink Bowagon were fast friends. Angelina wore her snakeskin slippers every day, and when the slippers wore out, Rink made her another pair. He has been making all of her shoes for 25 years now. The two of them have their own house up on Lonesome Mountain, only these days it's called Sweet Blossom Hill. Gardening is how Angelina and Rink earn their living. Actually, it's a family business. You see, every one of their 7 children was born with a green thumb. And on that last page up there, I left the dedication because the author says, "For my brother Wally, because you were there to show me that what makes us different is what makes us wonderful." The end. And we will now hear the congregation sing to us as we walk out to RE.
Good morning. So we have 2 people that would like to become new members. So before I do that, I'd like to introduce our membership committee. So representing the whole committee today is Jane Watson, myself, Chris Lautz, and we have 3 members that were unable to be here today, Rick and Chris Walter and John Hoffman. So, it's my pleasure to invite our newest members to come forward at this time and to bring your order of service insert. And while they're walking up, I'm calling up Judy Maynard and Augustine Agurule. And Judy wrote a short bio that I'm going to read for them. We are Judy Maynard and Augustine Gurule, better known as Gus. Judy is originally from Michigan. She grew up downstate but left in 1960 for college at the University of Colorado and never came back to live here until last fall. Gus is originally from New Mexico. We have both lived in California for decades. We are climate migrants. We lived in an amazing senior community of almost 10,000 old folks called Rossmore in Walnut Creek, California. It is beautiful with lots of trees, every amenity you could ask for, including 27 holes of golf. The golf course was to be our refuge in the event of fire. However, after all the fires of the last few years, some made worse by the fire traveling in the canopy of the trees, it looked to be more of a trap than a refuge. We lived almost 2 miles from the only entrance and exit to the community. We moved because we are too old to deal with the potential loss of our home to fire and tired of worrying about fire and smelling smoke 5 to 6 months of the year, even when the fires were several hundred miles away. You guys want to move in a little closer, then the folks at home can also see you? Judy's mother and sister lived in Traverse City. Both are gone now. Her sister, Susan Willard, owned the local restaurant J&S Hamburg until about 2 years before she died. We visited here many times and spent the last of Judy's mother's life living here. Experts on climate migration suggested moving to the upper Midwest, so here we are. We come from very different places. Judy grew up in the upper-income Detroit suburb of Grosse Pointe Shores, Michigan. Gus grew up in the largely Spanish-speaking community of Almeda, New Mexico. I'm not sure I said that right. Which are founded in the 1500s. Judy is just a second-generation American. Gus knows the names of his New Mexican ancestors back to before 1680. He didn't learn English until he went to school. Judy was raised in the Presbyterian Church, but has been a non-believer since about 9 or 10. Gus entered a seminary at age 14, and his first career was as a Catholic priest. A definition of Unitarians is that they are people from many backgrounds, have a variety of beliefs, but have the same values. That well describes us. We want to join the Unitarian Universalist Church of Grand Traverse, as it includes a diversity of beliefs, but a commitment to our values of community, involvement, social justice, and peace.
And we will share these words adopted and abbreviated from an unknown author. We, the current members of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Grand Traverse, welcome you into our circle of love and commitment. May you find here, for life often carries with it pain, so may you find joy in the shared gifts of life and love. May you be challenged here, for questioning is a source of love and learning. May you add your voice to ours, finding harmony in the diversity we affirm. May you build on your faith here, a faith that sustains you during life's transitions. May you find your spiritual home here, creating with us a community that welcomes all. Above all, may you help us create a better world, cultivating human wholeness and authentic interdependence.
And now, if you'll all refer to your order of service, and we have a microphone up here for you too, so everybody gets to hear. So the new members recite in unison, and Jane and I will help you. We enter this faith with hope and possibility in our hearts, pledging to participate in and support the ministries of this congregation. We covenant to remain true to the spirit of love that flows through this church and guides us. We seek your welcome as we join you in this faith. And the congregation's response? We welcome you as once we were welcomed itself. We seek to be open and inclusive, respecting your inherent dignity, your ideas, and your vision, in times when it is easy and in times when it is difficult. We seek to be supportive, not only when you reach out in courage to us, but also when you reach out to you. In return, we ask that you recognize our humanity. We will not always live up to our ideals, and when we fall short, we invite you to stay in relationship with us and help us more fully bring alive the spirit of love. We welcome you as an equal member of this congregation, of this faith, and of our shared spiritual journey. And Alex, Jane, if you want to grab a bag and a folder.
First off, congratulations. We have a couple of short little things to do.
Did we do everything?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Welcome, welcome. I don't know how many of you remember hearing Gus tell us his story a couple of months ago. It was a wonderful, wonderful day to hear about. I think of this time in the service as a sharing and stewardship, as we all want to be a part of the gifts that are given to grow and nurture ourselves and our congregation. Think of all the ways in which we can be of service to each other and our neighbors and our world. And this offering is only one way, and a very important one. The offering here in the sanctuary is taken in baskets. There's one side for the congregation, one side for those in need. There are other ways, one of which is to mail a check to the office or to visit the website, uucgt.org, or to download the Vango app on your iPhone. I knew it was a V. Please give in joy and hope. And now we have another flower being represented by our Barbara Young, who will be playing Edelweiss. Edelweiss.
It is our practice as a religious community to set aside time within our service to name and honor the joys and concerns that touch our lives, those milestones and moments of our lived experiences. In a moment, I will share with you some of those joys and concerns that have been offered up for us to hold on our hearts together this morning. If you have a joy or a concern that's a bit too tender to share with us in our service, I invite you to reach out to myself or to a member of our congregational care team. Barb, would you raise your hand? Barb is wearing the rainbow stole of the congregational care team. She's also available if you have a concern that is a bit too heavy to share. And simply, if either of those just doesn't seem appropriate at this time, if your concern is just too heavy, I invite you to just feel held in the love of this community, as none of us is ever meant to travel life's journey alone. And so now here is what has been offered up for us in our service this morning. We have a candle of joy from Chris and Rick Walter. We share our joy that in 5 days we will celebrate 55 years of marriage, with all of its ups and downs, but most primarily the joys and work of committed, devoted love. To mess with Clint Black's lyrics, when we said we do, we meant that we will to the end of all time. We also light a candle on this Father's Day for all of those, the fathers that are here with us today and all of those who do the work, the important work of fathering. And we have a couple of fathers in particular that we are holding on our hearts this morning. I'm lighting a candle of concern. Please light a candle for my father, who is having complications from a recent surgery and is in and out of the hospital. He says he's fine, but I still worry. And this is anonymous. We have another candle from Sylvia Walworth. For my dad, 99 and a half years of reader, barber, sailor, and drinker, our hero. We also light a candle this morning in honor of Juneteenth, which is June 19th, the date that enslaved African Americans learned of their emancipation from slavery. And so we light this candle to honor Juneteenth. And a candle of joy for our newest members, Agustin and Judy, as they join our congregation and in our covenant. And now we light one final candle for all of the joys and concerns that remain on our hearts, but are remembered and not forgotten. As we join together for our time of prayer and meditation, let us meditate on this reflection from Thomas Rhodes, but first starting with our centering breath that we do together each Sunday. Closing our eyes if you feel comfortable, planting your feet on the ground, and feel the draw of your breath taking you deeper, taking a deep breath in and out. Another full and deep breath in and out. Within these flowers is the resurrection of the world. Transient and imperfect, these blossoms are still gifts of infinite value, like ourselves. Too often, we seek permanence and perfection, resisting change, blind to our shortcomings. We become caught up in the petty issues and routine activities of our daily lives. But may these flowers serve as a reminder as they allow themselves to open to the heavens. For despite their imperfections, they still have integrity. And though they are transient, they contain the seeds of transcendence, just like ourselves. Let us then also open ourselves to mystery and wonder, fretting not about small mishaps or even great misfortune. For the resurrection of the world is near. The resurrection lies within us. Let us keep a moment of silent appreciation together for these flowers. May it be so, and amen. Marianne will now share with you this morning's reading.
This story is something that I adapted from words by Teresa and David Schwartz. And there's a great deal of information about Norbert Čapek, who was, as a child in Czechoslovakia, he was an acolyte for the Catholic Church. And he was a young man who became disillusioned about that church. And he discovered the Baptists, and he began going to a Baptist church there. and became a minister. But slowly, his faith became more and more liberal. And he became a minister for them and took on a group. But in 1915, he accepted a call of a Baptist church in New York City and came over to America. But we found in his diary that he had written years later, a few years later, "I cannot be a Baptist anymore, even in compromise. The fire of new desires, new worlds is burning inside me." So Norbert and his wife, Maya, joined a Unitarian church in New Jersey in the 20s. When the war ended, when World War I ended, his parish grew to be 3,200 members, which for any church is quite a large number. And many of the people had very different views of things. So he was kept busy trying to satisfy each one. And these differences challenged Norbert to look for a special way for the whole congregation to feel the communion of their community, but without the traditional communion. He turned to the beauty of the countryside, and he turned to the beauty of the flowers, and figured that that was something everybody could bring to church, something that would be meaningful. So he asked them to bring a flower and place them in large vases, as we did. And upon leaving, choose a different flower to help create that united sense of community. During World War II, Chapek was very active. I think I skipped the part where they went back to Czechoslovakia. Did I? No. They were in Czechoslovakia. So he was very active working against the Nazis. And they put him in Dachau because he had committed the crime of listening to foreign broadcasts. He continued to do the flower ceremony there in the camp, and sometimes they could just find a little piece of green grass growing up, but that was part of the ceremony. And they, in a way, were testifying to a beauty that was larger than themselves and a love that would outlive them and outlive him. Norbert died there in Dachau. Maya, his wife, came to the United States, and in 1940, she belonged to the Unitarian Church in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where she introduced her husband's flower ceremony to them. And we took it up and thought that it was wonderful, and we've been doing it ever since. It's an affirmation to me of our continuity with the generations of struggle for ever-widening liberty. So when you leave today, we're going to ask you to choose a different flower than the one you brought. And as you do, take that home. Think of the joy another will feel when they have your flower, as you will feel the joy of your new flower.
One of my earliest memories on the East Coast was getting to celebrate the flower communion with the First Parish in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And a college junior at the time, I had relocated to the area to do some studying and research a few years before I would actually start my time there at Harvard. Before a whole summer that I would spend in the library among stacks of books, I walked through the doors that first Sunday in New England to a sanctuary filled with blossoms and bright colors. Though I was a total stranger, the UUs there at the First Parish in Cambridge welcomed me as one of their own, and they even provided me with a flower because, duh, I had forgotten to bring one. And in fact, I still forgot to bring one today. Old habits die hard. But while this wasn't the first time that I had been to a flower communion, it's still a ceremony and ritual that remains one of my favorites, and perhaps a favorite to some of you. It has lessons for all of us on what it means to come together as a community, bringing our skills and talents, our excitements and our wonderings, and yes, even those rough edges and imperfections. Amen. The Flower Communion is a tradition of celebrating the value and importance of each of our human lives, the gorgeous colors and expressions of our own personalities, hopes, and passions. And much like we celebrate Pride, it's a ritual that celebrates the flourishing through difference, showing us that great beauty abides when we are not all the same together. And in fact, the vases and our setting is not complete without these contrasting colors, petals, leaf sizes, and stems. The Flower Communion shows us that beauty is found right where we are, right as we are, in all that we are, and what each of us brings to community. And on this Flower Sunday, where many of us have joined both also online and also here in person, we have much to be grateful for from the growths and challenges of our first year of ministry together. Additionally, I think I speak for all of us when I say that it is a miracle and a blessing to be here now in our sanctuary with so many of us after so many months of distance and being apart from one another. It truly feels like a miracle that we can be together today and celebrate this. And our celebration of the Flower Communion as a moment of celebrating our differences is something that you've heard a little bit about as something that's not new. It's a tradition that's rooted to the core of its history and also a part of our own faith. You see, the other cool part about celebrating the Flower Communion on my first Sunday in New England was celebrating at the first congregation, as Mary Ann mentioned, where it was celebrated in the United States in 1940, the first parish in Cambridge. Originally, it comes from the Unitarians in Czechoslovakia who first celebrated this practice. The Reverend Norbert Čapek, the minister of the church in Prague, wanted to share with his community this ritual that celebrated beauty and abundance found in nature. And meeting out of a building that actually hardly looked like a church at the time, the new congregation needed some new sense of sacredness. Čapek found that what really mattered wasn't that they met in this ornate building or the sanctuary with all of its trappings or decorations. Instead, the people were ultimately what mattered most in any community. And while our flowers are symbols of our own individuality, our own uniqueness and beauty, they point to something else that Čapek was insistent when we celebrated the Flower Communion. For him, it was just as important to celebrate the whole bouquet, just as much as we celebrate each individual flower. The real message found in the Flower Communion is not just how we are different and unique from one another. While we bring many flowers through our doors, the real gift is the gift of communion itself, the gift found in gathering as a community. The knowledge that no matter who we are and what we look like, no matter how we express ourselves, our different sized petals and stems, our colors, shapes, and personality flavors, what's most special is how we care for one another in spite of all of that. The bouquet itself becomes more important than just each individual flower, and even though there may be flowers that are wilted, some that are less vibrant or even smaller than some of the others, we know the value that each flower brings to our mix. The lesson in the Flower Communion is that the whole bouquet is what matters most, not just each unique flower. The nature of what it means to be a community together, in whatever shape, form, comes back to this single principle, that the beauty comes from each one of us and what each one of us brings by being together. The Flower Communion is, in my opinion, one of the best expressions of what it is that we do and believe as Unitarian Universalists. It's a covenant that we make with one another each year as we bring our blossoms and stems and place them here in these vases, blessing them with the faith that we are meant and born to be different from one another, and that this is something ultimately to be celebrated. UUCGT itself has flourished throughout this time because each one of you has helped our congregation to live out this promise. You know why community is so important and why it matters that we continue to gather. That we continue to gather as one collective bouquet of beautiful and wondrous people who all care for one another. And so this Sunday, I am grateful for you. I'm grateful for all of the ways that we've remained connected despite the challenges of this past year, through Zoom, through YouTube, through our being separate. And likewise, I'm grateful for the compassion and warmth that you've shown me and also that you've shown one another, even in moments when our differences are highlighted or we've even had conflict with one another. After this year of shared ministry, I want to say thank you for living out this promise that we now affirm through gathering our flowers into these communal bases. Thank you for living into our values of compassion and connection. Our knowledge and care for each other and each one of us must also extend for the caring of the whole. We celebrate each other this day, and today we celebrate you, the irreplaceable, intricate you that you have shared with us all along. And so I invite us now to just pause and simply look at these gathered flowers up before us. This abundance of flowers and colors, all sorts of different shapes and sizes. Hold on your mind and on your heart the many things that you are grateful for from this past year. The gratitude we have for one another and what each of us brings to community. Having shared in this ritual together and having shared in our collective beauty, I recognize these flowers as blessed. And may these flowers remind us of the uniqueness of each one of us and that powerful, sacred something that happens when we come together in community. May it be so, amen, and blessed be. So in a moment, we will invite you, just as we did before, to come forward to take and receive a different flower than you brought with you this morning. Though you are invited, of course, to take a different one than the one that you brought with you, I won't tell if you happen to take one that you really like. For those of you that are seated with us and maybe have a bit of a challenge coming up, if you'd simply raise your hand to let us know that you'd like a flower to be brought to you, we can be sure to bring you a flower as well. And a point that I didn't share earlier too is that we have some virtual flowers up here on our screen that those in our community who are farther away from us or those who couldn't be here with us this morning, they've submitted some of these flower photos for you to look at too in a form of our virtual flower communion. So we'll take a moment to go row by row again, welcoming folks on each side to come forward and receive a different flower. And if you would do that same practice of coming out this way and then wrapping around toward the center, and those of you on this side coming around this way and wrapping toward the center. So we will go ahead and start. Oh, you got it. We'll go ahead and get some flowers going.
Chris and I were talking about wearing different hats. I think you'll understand. Let us go out into the world singing and laughing and find the joy of a beautiful blossom from someone's loving hand. As our chalice light is extinguished, remember the loving and compassionate connections we have with each other and the rest of the world.
In the spirit of covenant, community, and commitment, in the spirit of all of these flowers that we now share together, may we be made ready to serve one another and to create the world that we so desperately dream of. Go in peace all. Happy Flower Sunday to all of you, and may it be so, and amen. We now invite you into a time of fellowship and coffee, so please stick around. If you're happening to be a little bit more new and you want folks to come up and chat with you, get one of those yellow mugs, and we just invite you to enjoy your flowers and take them with you today and remember the joy of gathering together. Go in peace all, grow in love. Quite a production, huh?